Madam Chair, you're live.
All right, well, thank you. Um, Welcome, everybody. I'd like to call the Board of Supervisors of Elections to order. It is Thursday, June 20th, 2024 at 7:05. We have a virtual meeting going on. Roll call, Keanu Smith-Brown,
Present. Yeah.
Debbie Yatsick,
Here.
and Eileen Leahy here. We also have Ashley Leonard from the Office of Law joining us, and City Clerk Regina Watkins Eldridge joining us, and Cynthia Reuter from the Office of Law joining us too. We have a full meeting, as always. Regina, did we get any public comments submitted?
No.
Okay. And we have approval of the minutes, and I think right now we just have the March 21st minutes to approve.
Yes.
That's correct.
Okay. So any comments on those minutes?
No.
No.
Donnie, did you have any comments?
No, everything is set.
I had one thing I just wanted to clarify.
Sure.
On page 2, under surplus funds, we moved to add an additional third option to add a nonprofit organization or 501c3 charitable organization. And my thought is that we think of them the same, but you could technically be a nonprofit and not have a 501c3. And I think our intent was that it was just going to be a 501c3. Is that correct?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So we may have said it that way, which is why it's reflected in the minutes.
That's correct.
Okay, so can I get a motion just to clarify that for the future that
You
Can we
can't
do
do that. The motion you can't do that because you in your next set of minutes the same motion is in there and you fixed it already.
Oh, we did fix it?
Yeah,
Okay.
you fixed it in that's March. In April you fixed it.
Okay, just as long as we fix it. Great. Okay, so then we're good. Okay, can I have a motion then to accept the minutes as written?
Sure. I'll move
Yeah.
to accept. I'll move to accept these minutes as written with understanding of that clarity.
Great.
Second.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, and then we'll defer the April and the May, and then also our June 6th. We'll have to defer them to July, correct, Regina?
Yes. And don't forget to tell them about their new person.
Oh, I'm going to. I'm going to ask you to tell them about it. So next is our announcement. Drum roll.
Okay.
We have hired someone for our election administrative assistant, and her name is Teresa Bucalo, and she used to be my deputy. So she is coming, yay! So she worked with us during the previous elections for at least 3 of them, and she's coming back, and she's going to make sure that everything is provided to you timely. And she's a great person to work with, and we're happy to have her back.
Yay. Happy for you, Regina, and for us.
Thank
And
you,
for her.
Debbie. Thank you.
And she starts what, the 24th or 26th?
Monday. Yes, the 24th.
Okay, and 29 hours, I understand, a week?
Yes. She will be working Monday through Thursday, no Fridays.
Okay. And you'll send us what her hours are and also her extension?
Sure.
Okay, where will she be set up physically in the office?
We're having a renovation in our office right now. On Monday, that first week, she will be in the conference room.
Okay.
In the law office conference room. They're renovating our office, so I really can't tell you where anybody's going to be sitting in.
Okay.
So,
and will she be coming to our meetings or just as needed?
we're going to work on that and see.
Okay.
Because basically, I think she's going to be the face of the office, like when people come in. She's going to be the main person answering the questions.
Okay.
I think.
All right. And we can set some of those procedures up again like we've done in the past. Can we make sure to invite her to the July meeting?
Sure.
Okay. Well, that's great. For Keanu and Debbie, I think Debbie, you knew Susan Eckert, so we've had an election assistant in the past. You probably did too, Keanu, as a candidate. And it really does make a big difference in terms of having a point person, not just for candidates, but also for voters. And we're very fortunate to be able to start this earlier than in the past. And they just proved to be an invaluable resource. So we'll be glad to welcome her. All right, any other announcements?
No,
Okay,
not really, but we do just in honoring every day. But yesterday, Juneteenth, it would be nice to at least make a mention of that since it's a day after.
Okay,
But other than that, no major announcements though,
okay.
aside from that.
So we have a presentation this evening. We've presentation from Harry Huntley and Ryan Kirby in regards to ranked choice voting. We had set it up that we would have a 20-minute presentation. We do have a full agenda this evening. So I have been told by Regina that we need to vote on that 20 minutes. So if I could get a motion and a vote for that.
For tonight's meeting, I move that we have a 20-minute presentation regarding ranked choice voting.
Okay, all in favor or second?
I'll second that.
Okay, and all in favor?
Aye.
All right, great. Well, I know 20 minutes it's probably not enough time to go all through all this, but we can certainly have communications afterwards and go from there. So I want to welcome Harry Huntley and Ryan Kirby. So Julian, if you could
Yeah,
put
Mr.
them
Kirby,
in.
Mr. Kirby, you need to accept my invitation to be made a panelist, please. And
Harry.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me today. I'll just wait one moment while we get Ryan on the line as well, and then I can jump right in.
Okay.
Hey, Ryan.
Am I able to share my screen? Yes, it looks like I am.
yes, sir.
Great.
There he is, Ryan.
Okay, welcome.
Thank you guys so much for having us. We really appreciate it. This is something I've been passionate about for a long time, and sounds like now is such a good time to be thinking about election improvements as we're talking, as you guys have so smartly put together this election reform task force. So if it's all right with you all, I'll just jump right in. And as a heads up, I'm going to sort of give some of the background about why I think ranked choice voting is so wonderful and a little bit of what we've done in Annapolis. But Ryan is really the expert on the sort of how. So he'll be able to tell you guys more about what it looks like technically, and also probably answer any particular questions. So I, as Keanu knows, and I think I've explained to a couple of you guys, I got involved in Annapolis elections about the moment that I moved here in almost a little over 4 years ago, and really saw firsthand how important it was for our elections to be representative and to increase the turnout that we get in them. So just a little bit of background, I ended up getting connected with this group, Ranked Choice Voting Maryland. They're a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization trying to build support for ranked choice voting. I'm not an employee or anything. I just work with them a lot as a volunteer. They have a bunch of partners all across the state. But I want to jump right in and talk about why ranked choice voting is so crucial. This is a perfect example here where we saw a super close election that had, if you look at it, most of these Nader voters were saying they preferred Gore. Some preferred Bush, but it could have been enough to have swung that election. And you might think, well, that's national politics, right? It doesn't matter around here. But in fact, it really could. I went back and looked at the Annapolis election of 2009, where we did have 3 candidates. And in fact, a mayor ended up getting elected without a majority, an absolute majority of support. And as I'll talk about a little bit more later, there are lots of other reasons why ranked choice voting can be beneficial, but I think this is a really crucial one that we want to make sure but particularly now, citizens have confidence in our elections. It's, I think, a really simple change that makes a big difference. So and when I say simple, I really feel like it is super simple. Ryan can get into the nitty-gritty of it, but to me, all it is saying that when Annapolis voters go to the polls, in addition to picking their first choice, they get to pick their second and third, maybe their fourth and fifth choices. So this is an example from I just happen to use 2018 Maryland Senate candidates, where you pick your one, I picked Ben Cardin, but folks could be able to potentially pick multiple. And to be clear, no one has to do anything under any system of ranked choice voting that I see. Everybody is still able to pick just one choice if that's how they want to do it. It's just allowing them to have additional ones. So in this case, you might say, boy, I really like that guy, Arva Vora, but if I can't have him, Ben Cardin's my second choice. Or maybe I'll write in that I want Eileen to be my next center. She'll be my first choice, and then Ben Cardin will be second. So what I want to talk about beyond this idea of spoilers is the real benefits that we get out of doing ranked choice voting. And luckily, as you'll hear a little bit more about from Ryan, we actually have a lot of great research from all across the country, from cities and states that are already using ranked choice voting. One of the biggest ones, I think, is getting less negativity. We know that, for instance, just looking at polls of voters like in Santa Fe, 2/3 are saying that under their first race, it was less negative. Even looking at sentiment of analyses, right? Not just asking voters, but seeing that when we look at how ads get run, we can get more civility. And I think that's really important in local government, not because we have such a gigantic problem of people negative campaigning, but because what the problems that we see at the national level really could be spilling down to our local level. And we want to be proactive in preventing that. Another really important one, as I talked about from the very beginning, I know you guys have been making turnout a priority with everything that you do, and particularly with the task force report. That was one of the big things that they were talking about. So I thought this was incredible. I was genuinely really surprised by this, even as a supporter, to see a 10-point increase in voter turnout compared to a traditional primary, because voters have the opportunity to get excited about more candidates, and did not see significant change in demographics of voters, right? We don't want to see that 10% increase come from just one group of people. And if New York City can do it, Annapolis can do it, right? The very first race that New York City used ranked choice voting was their highest turnout since 1989, in about 30 years, and had 941,000 voters turn out even just in the primary, of whom 95% said that it was simple to use. Because I understand this is sort of the number, I would say the number one thing, but the first thing that people say to me about this is, well, if you give people the option to rank a second and third choice, aren't they going to get confused? And it's a super valid question. I don't want to dismiss it just out of hand. If that was the opposite way, if 95% of voters said that it was confusing to complete their ballots, I would not be standing before you and saying we should do this. But it's not just in New York City. We had a really cool example in Virginia not too long ago where some voters were using ranked choice voting and some weren't. And we saw that that there was no difference in how easy they said it was to fill out their ballot. So this is really one of, I think, the most crucial points to make here. This is not something that voters find confusing. And in fact, 77% of them are saying they want to use it again. Again, we have lots of really peer-reviewed research on this. This is another stat that I particularly love, that there are significantly more women elected to office in cities that use ranked choice voting. Now, you can imagine that correlation maybe going a little bit of both ways, but I think it's a really wonderful point to make. So ultimately what we're getting at is more people can run. We get less partisan, not less partisan, but less rancorous, less unpleasant debate. We don't have to worry about these spoiler effects and get less negative campaigning, because ultimately voters get more choice, which gives them a greater voice. so the politics can work for all of us a little bit better. And then just to close this out, I want to talk a little bit about some of our champions in Maryland. Jamie Raskin, who I know is a personal hero of mine, of a lot of other folks who I talk to who think about elections, has been one of the #1 champions of ranked choice voting. We also, I am, as some of you guys know, on the city's Democratic Party, and while they did not endorse ranked choice voting specifically, they did make a really clear point about what the city council and the board of supervisors should be thinking about coming out of that election reform task force. So I just highlighted a couple of points. First of all, do something. Also, that we want to see solutions to spoilers, both in primaries and general elections. I would count this under modernizing the city's election laws. And also, the point is about overall, and I wrote this resolution, so I can tell you guys this really is like the main thing that we wanted to hammer home with it. Reforms adopted should be all about increasing voter participation and their representation, raising their voices and their choices. So thank you all so much. I try to keep that relatively speedy because I know we don't have a ton of time, but at this point, I will turn it over to Ryan. And I hope that if anybody has any additional questions, please, I'd love to keep talking about this with you. And I promise I will listen, but if you let me, I will talk your ear off. So thanks, everybody.
Well, thank you, Harry.
Thanks, Harry.
All right, well, welcome, Ryan. Is it Ryan or Brian?
Ryan.
It's Ryan, right?
Yes, Ryan.
Okay, great. Well, welcome.
Thank you. I am sharing my screen now. Hopefully it's coming through on your end.
We can
Yeah.
see you, Ryan.
Okay, awesome. Cool. Well, thank you for that, Harry. I have a brief presentation just going through some of the administrative pieces, the implementation of RCV, just a brief intro about my organization. So my name is Ryan Kirby. I'm the Director of Public Policy at the Ranked Choice Voting Resource Center. We are a nonpartisan nonprofit, and we're dedicated to supporting RCV implementation across the country. I want to emphasize that we are not advocates. I'm not here to tell you what to do. I'm just here to provide some informational testimony about what RCV is and how it's implemented. And I also want to emphasize that if the city decides to move forward with RCV adoption, we are happy to provide assistance wherever possible, free of charge, and work with you on whatever we can. So this is a brief presentation about RCV implementation, but we'll cover what is RCV. I know Harry touched on that, but we have a quick graphic that I find to be particularly helpful. Where it's used, information about the current voting equipment used in Anne Arundel County, some typical administrative changes that we see across the country, show you a couple of sample ballots, and then I was asked to bring some example charter language that just in case you're curious as to what that might look like. And then at the end, happy to take any questions. So one of the things that we find that helps people understand RCV is to look at an actual RCV ballot. And since we've already cast our first ballot, we can see that this looks like this RCV ballot looks a little bit different. So here is an actual sample ballot from Maine's presidential primary that they held earlier this year using ranked choice voting. And you'll notice at the top, they have the clear instructions to help voters before they get to the actual RCV contest. And on the left is the Democratic primary ballot, and on the right is the Republican primary ballot. So the brief overview of RCV, looking at single winner ranked choice voting. So voters rank their preferred candidates on the ballot, and ballots are scanned and centralized to be tabulated. All of the first choice votes are counted, just like in a plurality election, and we look for a winner. If no candidate has a majority, then we begin moving to rounds of counting with our ranked choice voting. In the example on the screen, we have candidates A, B, and C, and none of them have a majority of votes in the first round. The candidate in last place is eliminated, and in this case, that's candidate C. The voters who picked that candidate have their ballot transferred to their next choice. So as you can see, once the ballots have been transferred, we check for a winner again. If a candidate gets a majority, then they are elected. But if there are still no candidates with the majority, then we repeat the process of eliminating the last place candidate and transferring their ballots to their voters' next choice and checking for a winner. In the example here, thanks to the help of second choice rankings from candidate C, candidate A has a majority and they're elected. So where is ranked choice voting used? It's currently being used in 2 states, 3 counties, and 45 cities. There are also 6 states that use it for their military and overseas voters. Some prominent examples of RCV use include Maine. They're the first state to use it in 2018 for state and federal primary elections and general elections for Congress. Alaska adopted it in 2020 with its first use in 2022 for all state and federal elections. They also had a special election, which sped up their implementation timeline by 3 months, but they did a great job with that. As mentioned earlier, New York City, they adopted it for their city primaries and special elections. And then Cambridge, Massachusetts, they adopted proportional representation for their city council in 1940, and they're the longest continuous use of RCV in the country. So now with implementation, I want to start with the voting equipment. That tends to be one of the big questions that we get about ranked choice voting and its implementation. So all counties in Maryland use election systems and software, and it's my understanding that the city of Annapolis for a number of elections has been using the county to run its elections. So I'll focus kind of on the county for a little bit. But election system software is also known as ES&S. And Anne Arundel County uses the DS200, DS850, and Express Vote equipment. And I want to highlight that all of that equipment is RCV capable. It just needs a software upgrade. So the hardest part when it comes to voting equipment is already kind of out of the way, and that the state already has, all the counties in the state already have RCV capable equipment. So these machines can scan the ballots and they can produce what is called a cast vote record, or a CVR. And then the software upgrade allows the CVR to work with these RCV contests. And then we take that cast vote record of the CVR, and then it's uploaded into the tabulation software, an RC Tab, which is the free open source software that the Ranked Choice Voting Resource Center has created. It handles the RCV tabulation, and it works well with our ES&S equipment. And then it takes care of the round by round count and gives you the results at the end. Just a couple other things to highlight is that with ES&S, they can design ballots with up to 23 rankings, if that's something that you would need. And they can include both RCV and non-RCV contests on the ballot. And then there are a few jurisdictions that I just wanted to highlight here that use ES&S equipment that are already conducting ranked choice voting elections, just kind of more evidence that it can be done. Particularly Maine and New York City, they both use ES&S equipment, and they used RC Tab for their tabulation tool. The next thing is implementing RCV does require some changes to the current things. One of the things we like to highlight is voter education. It's an important one. Election officials typically have a voter education campaign each cycle, and ranked choice voting is going to be part of that when you're implementing ranked choice voting. Typically updating existing voter education campaigns and including new information about the changes to the ballot, and including information about how voters should use their ballot. Another administrative change is ballot design. I have a couple of examples in the next two slides, but they do look a little bit different. And it means updating the instructions, making sure all the contests fit on the ballot, and you want to while maintaining best practices for usability. The voting system, some jurisdictions are using legacy equipment, which is already outdated and due for replacement. But in this case, Maryland is already on the right step, so we don't really have to worry about voting systems. Reporting results. So many of us on election night are staring at the computers and on our phones, trying to get election results as quickly as possible. So election officials have to consider how they get their results currently and what that process is going to look like for sharing unofficial results. There are a number of best practices that already exist for our severe jurisdictions, but it's just something that election officials will have to decide how they want to handle. And I also want to highlight that on the right side of the screen, you can see it's an image from RCViz. That's a free tool that is available to election jurisdictions that want to utilize for their results. It takes the output that comes from the tabulator and it makes it into a slightly more user-friendly, so you're not just looking at like an Excel spreadsheet kind of results. And a number of jurisdictions have taken advantage of that as a results display. And then the last thing I just want to highlight are audits and recounts. Hopefully we don't have to deal with recounts, but that sometimes they do happen. But election officials may need to make some small adjustments to their existing rules just to make sure everything works as intended with ranked choice voting. But there are a number of reports about recounts and existing best practices for that. And then here's just a couple of sample ballots. This is used from Tacoma Park, and this is a sample from one of their ward contests. And I just want to highlight, they use IVS voting equipment. They're a smaller vendor, so they don't use ES&S currently, but just so you can get a sense of what another kind of ballot looks like, and it's used in Maryland. And then last, here's another Maine ballot. I want to show you Portland, Maine, because they have an RCV contest on the left, as well as a plurality non-RCV contests on the right. So that's both RCV and non-RCV contests on the same ballot. And then last, we have some example charter language. I can, of course, send you the full thing, but this is also available through Tacoma Park City Charter on their website, just in case you're interested in diving into some of the language that's used for modifying charters to implement ranked choice voting. But again, happy to send you full versions and other examples as well. And that's my presentation. Any other questions?
All right, well, you timed it well. 2 minutes left. Let's try to keep it to about 5 minutes of questions if we can. If we also have additional questions, can send them off to you or have you back another time, that would be great. So, Debbie, I want to start with you. Do you have any particular questions?
Yeah, I mean, I am just not sure ranked choice voting is a good fit for our little city of Annapolis, at least at this point. We really don't have contested elections. I mean, looking at our last 4 elections, we have like 1 or 2 people running. We have like 0 contested primaries in many wards. We have you know, our election task force, or our charter review commission just went through this, and our election task force. So it's all recent from our last 4 elections. We have a problem with getting candidates here. So we have 0 Republicans in many wards. We have 1 Democrat, maybe 2. I mean, the majority of our 8 wards, and even our mayor, I just don't. You know, maybe if you have a lot of people running, but we have other issues in getting voter participation and getting candidates to run than RCV. Also, I'm a little concerned with some of the results that have happened in other places. Arlington County in Virginia tried it. You know, they tried it once and they let it go. And then I read about Alaska where there was 5 candidates. The top 3 moved on. Number 3 dropped out. So number 4 was moved into number 3. And then number 1 and 2 in the runoff, their people kind of, you know, split on them. So number 3 won, who really was number 4, right? So number 4 won because of how it flowed down the chain. And I don't know if that's what the voters really intended, was for number 4 to win the seat.
I don't know.
And so there's a lot of a lot of variables, I guess. And I'm just looking at our city. I don't get it for here right now.
Debbie, if I can address those 2 as I heard them, I'll take the second part first. I can't speak to that specific election. Honestly, I don't know all of the details, but I think you're talking about the congressional election in Alaska, right? That led to Peltola getting elected. So I really don't know all the details on it, but I will say that last I checked, Mary Peltola was a very popular member of Congress, had very good approval polling. And to the first point, I think I totally agree with you, right? Like it is a problem that we don't have enough people running. And this is not it's not that this is a solution to the problem of there are too many people running. It's a solution to the problem of not enough people running. That when we can be sure that campaigns will not be as acrimonious, I think more people are willing to step in. And I had a couple of stats about that in my slides, but I'd be more than happy to follow up with you and send you some of those detailed results of how we see more people being willing to throw their hats in the ring under ranked choice voting.
Okay, thank you.
I can also provide some context to the Arlington and Alaska situations. I know in Arlington, it sounded like it might have been a political decision or something related to the not using in the general election, but it sounds like they're going back to using RCV again for their upcoming next election. So I'm not entirely in tune with some of the internal politics going on there, but it does seem like they're moving back to it. So that was promising. And then with Alaska, that was definitely a very unique situation with one of the candidates dropping out that ended up made the top 4 primary a little bit different and general election. But I know some of the candidates, I mean, with ranked choice voting does require, not necessarily require, but some candidates do better when they are reaching out to other campaigns and trying to grow their votes necessarily and reach out to other voters. Sometimes that works well for candidates and sometimes it doesn't. And so, I believe all candidates were given the same kind of advice from the state board about how to run their campaigns and what other examples were going on in other jurisdictions. And some took more advantage of it than others. And then hopefully lessons learned and they'll be able to take that to their next cycle of campaigns.
Okay, great. All right, well, thanks. Keanu, you're up. What questions might you
don't-
have? We only have about 5 minutes.
No, that's all right. I actually do not have any questions for right now. If there's anything, though, that they can share to alleviate any concerns or make sure that those who may be weary of ranked choice voting are no longer weary, then I open it to that. Though I wouldn't blame the process for causing much of the concern. It's more so the people in that instance that you just mentioned that kind of created that issue. So I wouldn't say, okay, because of that, we should not have ranked choice voting, as well as for the persons that are not running. I mean, it only really would take place if there were 3 persons in a race. Is that correct? For the most part, it's usually when it's 3 persons in a race that ranked choice voting makes it so. Because
we probably wouldn't even.
Yeah, so if we
have
don't
it.
have 3
Yeah.
people in a race or more, then we don't even have to worry about ranked choice voting being a problem, if that's a problem to some. But no, I don't have any questions. Thank you, Eileen,
Okay,
for
great.
offering that for everyone.
Well, I think you answered a lot of my questions, which is helpful. I kind of agree with my colleagues that, is this the time for Annapolis to be needing RCV, or is it going to be an asset for us at this point? Especially as we would try to get to have more candidates. I know that ranked choice voting can be used in nonpartisan or partisan elections. Had you considered what you were thinking of in terms of applicable to Annapolis?
Yeah, I'll speak to this as kind of the advocate here. My opinion is just we don't need to be making a bunch of radical changes. My opinion is we don't need to be going with nonpartisan at this point or multi-member district. There's a lot of different things you can combine with ranked choice voting. At this point, my position and that of the other folks who I think have been working on this is just all we want to do is let voters say what their second and third choices are as well.
Right. But again, that speaks to the whole idea of not having a lot of candidates. So if we did run it as even partisan, we rarely have, I shouldn't say rarely, we often don't have people opposing. So I guess I just wonder if the time for ranked choice voting in Annapolis hasn't quite hit yet, but is certainly something to be considered. I did also have a question. I appreciated hearing about the equipment and the compatibility, because that really is important, particularly for us, even though we are using the board right now. There's always the chance that we won't, especially if we have special elections and things like that. You mentioned that, Ryan, you mentioned that a software upgrade is needed at, I believe, the state level. I know that the state is scheduled to have, the Board of Elections is scheduled to get some technology upgrades. Well, they keep pushing it back. Do you know if that type of software upgrade is on the list of things to consider doing?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because, and this comes up, every state is a little bit different how they handle certification of voting equipment. Because RC tab isn't like a piece of voting equipment, it doesn't touch a ballot, it never like interacts with it in any way. It doesn't count as like a voting system, but it's sometimes considered like an add-on to it. So it really depends on how the state interprets what RC tab is. I actually don't know entirely how the state interprets RC tab and like what that certification process might look like. So definitely would something be happy to work with them on and get information about if that's something you're looking to move forward with. Or if you want to reach out, I'm not sure what you might consider the appropriate channel, but definitely happy to work with you or the state board on that to get some clarification.
I think
You know,
one
going
last,
back to the question of us having I'm sorry, did I interrupt you, Harry? Going back to the question of us having few candidates, do you know of a jurisdiction that might have it so that RCV only kicks in if they have 3 candidates?
That's what I'm getting at, Eileen.
Yeah, that's actually a good question. So I think you can write some of the legislation so that it only kicks in that way if you want. I know Carbondale, Colorado was the first place that came to mind. They've had RCV on the books since 2002, but they've never had more than 2 candidates since then. I believe it's for mayoral elections. I had to double check, but I think it's for that. And it's been on the books. It's been ready to go, basically. They just haven't had as competitive elections, but some years there'll be some jurisdictions where a number of, either a ward or a council district or anything like that might have a lot of candidates, and there might be some years where it's an incumbent running, everybody likes the way that its city is going, and they don't have a lot of candidates. But RCV kind of just is there ready to go. If you get a competitive election, then you're not like scrambling to add it last minute kind of thing, if that's something you're looking to do.
Okay, great. All right. Ashley, Regina, or Cynthia, do you all have any questions?
None from me.
No. Well, I guess we're good. We're running out of time. Again, this is a great subject, and I wish we had more time to devote to it. I do appreciate your time. So if we have your email, so if we have other questions or anything like that, that would be helpful. And as you've noted, we're trying to, make some changes, and there's a lot of things about balancing what we can and cannot do in a short amount of time. And if you do one thing, it cancels out doing something else. And there's also the cost factor. And for us as a municipality, we do have to keep that in mind. And there's always the chance that we'll be running our own elections versus having the state. And we've had a very good relationship with the state and having them run it. And as Harry noted, we are looking at really trying to increase the turnout. So even though if we don't go to ranked choice voting, I could see us certainly providing some voter education so that if people have those questions, we can certainly provide that for them, particularly on the website. Okay.
well, thanks again so much. Oh, sorry, Keelan.
Thank you.
No, I actually was going to say, Harry, and I think you were asking something earlier, but you kind of didn't.
No, I was just saying thanks so much for having us. I really appreciate you guys' willingness to pay attention to this important topic, and we'll be sure to follow up with you on information about increasing candidates in the races and also on some of those specific examples that you brought up.
Great. Well, thank you so much.
Have a
Thank
great
you.
evening.
Ryan, I'll see you, Harry.
Right. Well, that was very interesting and helpful. All right, we're on to old business.
Okay, here we go.
Legislative review. We got a lot done on June 6th. We missed you, Debbie, but we tried
Yes,
hard not to make any decisions that really hadn't been things that we had talked about. We were really just trying to review what we had done in May and just kind of move those forward. Those drafts did go up to David Garris and up at the Anne Arundel County Board of Elections, and we had hoped they might be able to give us a response by tonight, but I know that they're still busy with election preparation. So as soon as we get feedback from them, we'll distribute it out. For tonight, we just have 2 others really to look at, which is provisional voting and canvassing, and also recount. Cynthia did send us, well, let me backtrack. We talked about I think we actually voted on it, provisional voting and canvassing to adopt it, but we really didn't take a look at the specifics of it to see how it fit. And I know one of the things that I've heard from city council members and also in our meetings is, if we adopt things kind of carte blanche, do they really fit what we need to be doing at a municipal level? So Cynthia did send out that information, and I hope that you all had a chance to review it. Why don't we start with provisional ballots? I think the overall question might be is, do we still want to move forward with adopting things in total and then making changes, or do we want to make there's two ways to approach it. Do we want to continue on the path of we just adopt that code and make exceptions? Or do we want to incorporate certain things from that code and incorporate it into our existing code?
Okay.
Any comments from you all?
Okay.
The only one would be, I know that this is a topic that you had brought up, Eileen, and from your experience, is there any hesitation to not adopt the full piece? Because other parts I can say, okay, yeah, maybe let's not adopt the full part of the Maryland Code and take our time to really dive through the bits and pieces. But because of this one being something that you emphasize should be updated in our code, do you feel that there's any issues or hesitations as to not just adopt it in full?
Well, I think on the part of provisional ballots, I mean, I didn't have a chance to look at it specifically with how our code is right now to see how well it follows.
And
It gets into a little bit more detail than what we have. I mean, the provisional ballot section of our code right now, I don't really consider it as broken as such. We had kind of moved it out, and it seemed like a section that we could move out and perhaps just go with the current system. But I'm looking at, again, we could probably get some feedback from Cynthia in terms of some of these things. I guess my overall thing is if we were to be in the situation where we were not using the city, the county board of elections, could we still follow this code?
Right.
To this type of detail. So are we getting into a detailed situation that we'd like to be at, but maybe couldn't be at in certain circumstances? That's my concern about that. Probably more so with canvassing, the canvassing piece than the provisional ballots. The canvassing really has some other ways of approaching it that I'm not quite sure that are needed at our level or that we could follow through at our level.
I do like I think voters would appreciate the in-depth or the detail of what the state offers for provisional ballots, seeing that we only kind of have, we do label A through I here in our code, but they kind of break it up by section and it details what each part is, which I think would be helpful for our code. I'm actually doing what you mentioned, Eileen. I know we maybe didn't have too much time to compare the two, but I am going back and forth between the two, and I'm seeing some similarities here, and not really any problems that would prevent us from just adopting the full state code. Because provisional ballots, I know people can question provisional ballots often. Why do I get a provisional ballot? And this gives, I think, the voter a full layout of what that would be for them if they had to get a provisional ballot, and it would answer any of the questions that they may have, at least for what I'm seeing.
Right. On the other hand, it speaks to early voting centers, which we don't have.
Yeah, we would just have to take that piece out. So maybe we actually just highlight or go over parts in our time that we feel should be incorporated, or we actually just go and cross out the ones that we feel do not apply to our city in adopting the full code.
Debbie, do you have any thoughts?
yeah, I don't have any on my on that provision. I don't have any questions or show any concerns on that. So I think I thought it was in compliance.
It actually is quite the same too. If you look at it, many of the 1s, 2s, and 3, it's pretty similar to our code. It's just not as many sections in our code. That's all.
Right, which goes back to the question of do we adopt the state code and then make exceptions, or do we update the code? And I know Ashley and I have gone back and forth with some of this. Do we just kind of take the whole thing out or just put pieces in? Ashley, do you have any thoughts on it?
No, the provisional, I was just looking at it again. The provisional, I don't really see all that many issues with adopting the state by and large. I mean, there isn't any more intense like administrative or record keeping requirements than we already have. I think, like Keanu said, I think it just might more clearly set it out in an easier reader format. Canvassing's a little different, but the provisional doesn't really bother me if whichever way you want to go.
Mm-hmm.
I would, in regards to the voter and supporting what I feel is best for them, I would say that adopting the state code for provisional ballots would not be a problem. Of course, we have to take out the state board shall prescribe all forms. You know, we have to take out the pieces that specifically talk about the state. And it says each local board shall maintain. So of course we have to change that. But it may be Cynthia can assist with making sure that all the state related terms can be city related terms. But I say it is pretty thorough, and I like the format of it, and brings clarity, user friendly. That's all I have to say about it.
Cynthia, would it be possible to put the to take the state and put it side by side with what our current code is, so we could do, just not tonight, but at our next meeting, do a kind of a line by line? Because one of the things I do think about when we change code in terms of how we quote unquote sell it to the city council and also sell it to the voters, not so much sell it, but explain it. So sometimes, you know, big changes have the right intention, and really in our eyes, we realize they're not really big changes, but they're big changes to the voters. And so again, going back to that, how we want to approach it, if we could look at a side by side at our next meeting, it might give us a better idea of how much we really want to shift it, particularly also with the canvassing, which I think has more issues.
Certainly no problem with the provisional ballots. Canvassing is very large. So that's going to be more challenging, but can certainly do that too.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing that I think we really were, well, we were thinking of for canvassing, and I know I'm jumping ahead a little bit, is that the dates really for them are very different than what our dates are. And the biggest decision we need to make in terms of canvassing at this point is, are we going to open the ballots before election day or not? And so I'm wondering, when we get to that part, if we can keep that more simple. How do you guys want to proceed?
Well, and we'll get to canvassing, but in regards to provisional ballots, if Cynthia can provide us that side by side, or we just take the time to look over the side by side, I would say that just in viewing it and going over it a few times, even tonight, I see it being a benefit to update it to resemble what the state code says. Of course, with just changing the specific terms that don't apply.
So you say you're updating it to respond to the state. Are you saying do the state code and then adapt it to the city, as opposed to keep the city and adapt it to the state?
Yes, I say, and this is one of the only ones, but I say go with the state code and adapt it to the city.
I was going to say the other way around, but either way. I mean, the result's the same.
I guess I'd like to see the side by side, just to make sure that we're, if we do go to adopting it and accepting it, that we make sure that we're including what we really need to include and not including what we don't need.
Right.
Right. Now,
Um,
we'll say, just in, quick, as I went over, there is some language that's exactly the same.
Right.
Like yeah, there's many sections here that are just like our city code. So I think our city code actually probably did that, took parts from the state code. Maybe,
Yeah, that's what I thought.
that maybe they just took parts
Right.
and they
Yeah.
just
Well,
not
I mean, the the code is kind of a boilerplate for a number of places.
Mhm.
It, looking ahead, I mean, one of the comments that I've gotten, we did get in the task force work session from some of the city council members was their concern also that when updates are made to state code, they may or may not fit at the municipal level. And that needs to be considered. And that's one of the things that they feel that in other areas where they've done that, I think the environmental areas have created some, not so much issues, but have created some things that they have to go back. It's not as simple as keeping it cookie cutter because changes are made. And so you really do have to keep up on that. Again, I would prefer to be able to look at a side
Yeah,
by
let's
side
do
for
that.
voting,
Let's do
but
that.
that's up
Yeah.
to you all if you all are ready.
No,
So,
I think, yeah, let's do the side by side. Because I do agree, Debbie, to what you were sharing, that if we want to keep the core of our code and just maybe slide over some additional updates so that it can fit the current times, I think we should go about it that way. So if we want to compare it at the next meeting and then decide on the prime ones.
okay. Do we need a vote on that, Regina, or can we just? I don't think we need a vote, but
I would say yes.
okay. If in doubt, Regina says yes. So if I could have I guess we're looking at a motion to see if ask Cynthia if she can provide us with a side by side, and then we will take it up at our next meeting.
Okay.
Does that work?
How does that work?
I saw her come up. I guess so.
Did you make the motion? Or
No,
you're saying what?
Motion has been made, but
Yeah.
I keep seeing Regina's thing pop up and I'm wondering, does she have another comment? I guess not.
No, I don't have a comment.
Okay.
All right. So yeah, I think officially though, I'll move that at our next meeting, upon Cynthia providing us this side by side, we'll be able to review the Maryland election law and our city code on provisional ballots.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Any opposed? All right. So moved. All right, Cynthia, we keep giving you homework.
She's
All
a
right.
pro though. She's a pro.
So moving on to canvassing, which I think if I'm hearing us all agree that there does seem to be even more changes. Do we want to just go ahead and do the same thing at this point?
Yeah, because I think this was an opportune moment to just get a first review and first look and kind of give us an understanding of what really we are comparing, and it would be extremely helpful, I'm sure, for all of us and those in the future to see that side by side on record. So yeah, if we can, I can make the motion for this as well if you'd like.
Okay, can I get a second?
Second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? No. Okay, so moved. So we'll have Cynthia, ask Cynthia also if she can provide that for us. All right. All right, one step forward, two step backwards, but we want to do it right. All right, next thing on the agenda is the recount. I think we held off discussion at our June 6th meeting because we want to make sure, Debbie, that you were included in it. I think we are at the point with the process that we're still looking at, if I recall, we've agreed that petitioner can be the candidate or the campaign, and that has been included in the definitions. So now we're looking at still a number of things to talk about as far as whether to make it automatic, If it is automatic, what level of recount are we talking about? And also what is the threshold for which recounts can be done, whether they are done for automatic or they are done because a candidate requests it be done.
Right.
Um,
So I think we're in agreement that it will not be automatic, I believe, or for the majority, we said that
Right.
we do not want to go with the automatic form, and we offer it upon the recommended percentage, which Debbie, if I believe I spoke correctly at our last meeting, we mentioned that maybe that 0.51%
Right. Yeah.
that we would go forward with. And then we would, of course, offer the candidate, hey, it being within this margin, a difference, would you like us to do the recount? Upon the results being in their favor, because I think the part I think, Eileen, that we're really focused on is when does the payment happen? Does the payment happen beforehand and then they're reimbursed, or do we wait until the state offers the payment and then they send you a receipt that says, hey, you got to pay this, or the county, you got to pay this back to us because the results were not in your favor?
Well, the way the code reads, it involves a bond.
Mhm.
And so the bond is basically, you are saying that you have the money to pay for the type of recount that you're requesting. Now, when we went through this the last time and the candidate went up to the circuit court, it was confusing because it's just not done very often.
Right.
I believe, I could check on this. I believe that well, if the recount is done, it has to be paid for.
Mhm.
So if you're referring to putting in stipulations so that if the outcome changes, that they would be reimbursed with that, that's another section that we need to discuss.
Yeah, because in our code, it actually says the petitioner shall pay the cost of the recount and recanvass, and the petitioner's bond shall be liable for the costs unless the result of the election in the unit being or ordered recounted is changed, or
Right.
unless the petitioner has gained a number of votes over the petitioner's principal opposing candidate equal to 2% or more of the total votes cast.
Right.
And
So that's already in there.
Yeah, it's already in there
Right.
for us. So
So I think if we're not going with the automatic and we've already decided on the petitioner, if it seems like we're okay, we're where we are, we've
Right.
already, I mean, we can get into saying that we're gonna put a certain amount. I mean, the state has different levels in which you say you can or cannot have a recount. Do we want to get into that and say, okay, if it's more, unless it's like 5% difference, you can't ask for a recount, even if you're willing to pay for it? I mean,
Mhm.
I don't want to fix something that's not broken.
Right.
Right, because what I think the issue here at the beginning may have been the automatic aspect, and then we mentioned, okay, if it's not going to be automatic, let's clarify the percentage in the code for a recount taking place, which we don't really say that here. We don't say anything about percentages, so I think it was just updating it to resemble what the state offers. About the cost of a recount, because we don't really detail what that looks like. It just
Yeah, but that information was given to the candidate when they asked to have a recount. A full explanation was given to them.
Yeah.
Along with and also the amount will can change from year to year.
Is it possible to not require a bond? Would it be easier to not require a bond and still have confidence that we'll get paid if the cost falls on the candidate or the campaign?
I mean, that's part of state law. They have a bond. I don't know. I mean, Ashley, you had to deal with that in our last go round. I mean, what are your thoughts about,
Yeah, we'll see.
do we need to take the bond away, or do we need to just kind of clarify if it came up, how it would be dealt with up at sort of, circuit court?
I'd prefer to clarify. I don't really want to take the bond away, because the problem is, if you don't have to get a bond, and in theory, you're not really putting yourself on the hook, I guess. I mean, because then what if you don't pay? Then we would have to the city would have to sue you. It would have to become a whole court case. And the whole reason for the bond is that if you're serious about it, then you need to go out and get a bond, which is just holding a small percentage of what is needed.
Okay.
And we request bonds from all sorts of different things. Like, right now there's a sidewalk sign bond that the different business owners are required to get. So I don't, from a legal perspective, I wouldn't advise getting rid of the bond.
Okay.
I mean, I feel like you could maybe replace it with something else, but you need to have some incentive that they're serious about this and that they have the ability to pay for it if it comes to that.
Right. Now, can we then just focus on the offering matter? Because I think if we're not going to have the automatic recount, then at least provide some support to the candidate to say, hey, we're just notifying you that the margin of difference is this. If you're interested in having a recount, these are the steps that we can provide for you to do so.
That's done. I mean, that was done the last time and would be done.
Okay, so when it's within the margin of difference, we say to the candidate, hey, you can.
If the candidate requests a recount,
We do it.
we give them the information. We follow the code. They get the information of the 4 types of recounts they can request and how much they cost, and then they choose which one they want.
So what was so what was this about?
I don't know, Keanu, you're the recount guy.
No, I mean, I just know it was a part of our list. That was a part of the concerns and questions that we were asked about. So I'm looking over this, and is it updating it to be just as resembling to the state? Like, what is?
I think the biggest concern when it occurred the last time was who was going to pay for it. Could a campaign pay for it, or did the candidate have to pay for it? And I believe when this came up before, the candidate paid for it. And so what we're really doing is changing it so that if someone requests it, the campaign can pay it or they can pay it.
Okay.
Now, we could take the step that the state takes and say, well, if you don't have a margin of greater than such and such, you can't have a recount. On the other hand, we could also say, well, if you've got the money and you want to do it, we can do it. It is time consuming, and it is.
Right. Okay, so the part that we are going to update then, or is the allowing of the campaign to pay for the recount.
And we did that by defining petitioner as either the candidate
or the campaign.
The campaign, and so we don't necessarily have to change the recount code because it uses the term petitioner.
So we've reached our destination, and this was just confirmation of that. If there's anything in the future, we'll come back to it.
Well,
okay.
I mean, it's been worthy of review, and again, because it was a bit bumpy the last time.
It was,
but in large part because it hadn't been done in a while. But
okay,
I
so at
think
least we did some progress here. We allowed campaign.
But I think when we reviewed it again, we realized that it pretty much follows the state, that what we were asking. But I mean, Regina and Ashley, do you have any thoughts as far as the recount and having gone through it the last time of things that need to be changed or clarified?
I don't think there's anything you need to do. I think it works fine the way that it is.
Yeah, I mean, the largest problem, to be honest, is we don't often do it. So we had to basically re-educate everybody on what the process was, including the court, just because we don't do it that often. So if you don't do something regularly, it's a little rusty.
Right. And going through
So
a
we did.
recount is going to be emotional for not just the candidate requesting it, but the other candidate also. So it can be an emotional situation.
Well, progress is made. Oh, great. Well, let's move forward if we can. I think this
Okay,
is...
so we're
So,
not gonna
Debbie,
do
you
any
weren't
other-
here at the last meeting, but that's what I'm glad that we're now final on that.
So no changes to the count, to the code.
Not right now.
Okay,
We made it.
all right.
So will that, how will that change take place? I mean, did the city has to vote on that?
For what?
So when you said we've updated because that's the definition of petitioner, we've updated to make
Right,
sure. Okay, so
so
that automatically will apply to this part.
Right, we've added petitioner to clarify it, and I believe when Cynthia wrote it, it's actually refers to this particular section.
Yeah, right.
And if I recall, we checked to see if petitioner was used in any other parts of city code, and it wasn't.
Okay, wonderful, great.
Do I have that right? Okay,
All right.
all right, moving along.
Yes.
Okay. Next on fair election practices. I did send out kind of what I had been playing with in terms of looking at the campaign fund report. And if you've had a chance to look at it, if you want to give me some feedback. What I was kind of proposing, and what we've, I think, discussed in our past meetings, was that we had some leeway in terms of looking at the procedures of the campaign fund reports, as far as getting a little bit more into kind of what we consider okay and what we would prefer them not to do.
I know. Did you mention we would talk in depth about this today or further about it? Or we just were going to review it?
I mean, it's on there. I mean, if you want more time to go through it, we certainly don't have to do it tonight, but we want to get, it's not supposed to be ready for this July 1st.
Right.
And we'll be reviewing them, but you know, if it seems to be on the right track, we can continue moving forward with it. I know that Regina has been in touch with MIT about trying to make it more fillable. And I think I mentioned to you all some of the things that might be helpful to.
Right. No, it was good, Eileen. So you just sent one out on the 17th, right? You had one in May and then June. Yeah, appreciate that. I
So I
printed them
updated
both out.
I think like Monday, I try to put a few more things in. But again, I think my goal was kind of, can we do this without necessarily changing code, but really provide information so that we have kind of a more consistent approach. You know, the last go round, it came up a lot more in terms of people saying, how can I use the my monies? I think the biggest
Donations,
change
right.
I would propose, and we might have to make a motion for this, is the charities. And so what the state does, they don't allow straight out contributions to charities unless it's part of closing your account. So you can buy a ticket for an event, but you can't just give them $500 or sign on as a sponsor. I think clarifying that would be helpful, because we have had situations in the past where somebody will say, okay, here's $500 to pay for the food for the opening of a community center. And so then then it comes into, is that really consistent with what the donation was meant for? And also, if it is an incumbent doing it, is that really something that should be a candidate money versus an incumbent? So I think the biggest change I would see is looking at charitable donations.
Yeah.
And maybe just clarifying some other things. I mean, our definitions in there are pretty broad.
Right. Yeah. Whatever will help, just we had so many amendments, whatever we can clarify to help us get through, namely Eileen, get through those review. I mean, we had so many reviews and addendums and it took months, right? So I really, being a past treasurer of a couple candidates, I definitely love having more details, more explanation in our campaign fund report descriptions or definitions, in the handout that an explanation of the code of the letters, the codes.
Well, how about I keep working on this. I'd like to send out something to treasurers and candidates and ask for their feedback of what would make it more user-friendly for them. What kind of questions do they have when things come up? I know we got a recent question in terms of limits. Somebody might have gotten like a check, one check for $5,000. But the intent was 2 people. It was a husband and wife. So how is that handled? And that actually is in our code, how you handle it. But that type of thing might be helpful for new treasurers to know how to deal with it. The other thing that we don't necessarily require, but it is in the code and also on the procedures, is we don't ask or make a big push for receipts. And so one of the things also that we might want to stress is that say a candidate pays for something themselves, they have to provide a receipt to their treasurer. And that's not something that's really clear. Right. I think that comes up if you are, say, entertaining a particular potential donor and that sort of thing. So it's kind of clarifying some of the processes that we expect, especially if we do have to go back and audit, that treasurers will have the information that we want from them. So I'm willing to continue working on it, send out, ask the treasurers for it, see what we can get from MIT, and then look at it again in July, but maybe not really get to it too much until maybe even August or September, and find out what we actually need as far as making code changes. We may not need to make a whole lot of code changes. We may just need to, I think the charities might be something we have to do a code change on or clarify. I don't know. What do you, Ashley, do you have a thought about that? No, I'm just bringing it up.
Yeah, no, the charities part I was debating. It would probably depend on what you guys settled on, but that might need a code change. The rest of it, in theory, you guys should vote on it as like a rule that you're promulgating under your power, but you could do it that way. Especially just things that are procedural clarifications, stuff like that would all be within your authority to adopt guidelines and rules, which is already in city code.
Okay.
And Eileen, what's in blue, technically we're just going to add to the report details so that person's reading this can say, okay, yeah, that applies to me. This is what I'll match it like that.
Right. Well, those are things that I noted in state code, and some of the things like social media came up last time. I mean, let's clarify what websites are being used as a personal website versus a campaign website. And then that gets into things like authority lines. But again, I'm just drawing on our past experience in the last election. We did have some community members concerned that personal accounts were being used for campaigning. And, we may or may not know what's going on, or if we do find out about it, how do we handle it? So those are just some of the things.
Okay.
Any other questions? So I'll just keep working on that. Does that sound?
Yeah,
Yeah,
let's look at it next month or into the fall, but that'll be very helpful for the candidates and their treasurer.
Absolutely will.
Okay, and I know that we have some other fair election practices maybe to address, but I think if we start with that and especially get that going, because while it doesn't apply for this July 1, we want to make sure that we have it all put in place, so when candidates do start, I mean, they're starting July 2nd, they're going to have to start abiding by some of these things if we move forward with it, or at least if they don't do it in July, they'll have to do it pretty soon. Okay. All right, anything else in fair election practices?
No.
Next item is the Anne Arundel County State Board of Elections request. The request that refers to is about the MOU information that were questions that had come up, and I think at our last meeting in May, we didn't have a direct answer, but we did get one. I think that was sent out. Ashley, do you want to comment on that? It's what you got from Jim Praley.
We're generally good. He already did, as legal counsel, he already did sort of his first review, and we've already accepted his requested changes. More recently, although now I meant that there was something about there are state changes going on related to certain things that are going to flow down to us. So he was going to look at those. And that would deal not with so much the main MOU, but with some of the exhibits.
Mm-hmm.
So he was going to get back to us about that. I think most of the actual MOU is, I would say, pretty good to go. I haven't heard any further comments on that from him. So I think we're just in the exhibits at this point.
Okay. Speaking of the county, I did see where I guess Regina just sent some information out to David.
Yes.
David sent, so we'll have to send that out to you all later. Okay.
Yeah, I'm reading it.
Okay, well, we'll take a chance to look at that and we'll go from there. Okay, next thing is priorities for FY25. I did go back and look at, and I sent that out. I know I just had time this week to get some of this done as far as looking at what we had proposed for the task force in 2023. And I think we can be pretty proud of ourselves for having accomplished quite a bit. And then we submitted individually some comments or priorities that we've shared. So I don't know if you want to pull that up right now. So we have the comments from the three of us.
Yeah, I haven't.
And I was really kind of looking at what are the things we really want to highlight in the coming year, July 1 to July 1. And when I look at some of our list, I think we've done a lot of it already.
Yeah.
So do we want to add some things, take some things off?
I think we can take election recount off for now. And I know I did it in terms of highlighted topics and not really detailed each, but I think voter education is crucial, as what you kind of highlighted too in your portion. Sending out the information to voters, making sure that they get those ballots, applications in hand. But other than that,
Well, do we feel that probably ballot questions has been covered? I think we're pretty good with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because we've already decided on what that should look like. It's now just the council has
right.
to.
I'm just kind of going down the list. I mean, open slash blanket primary ranked choice voting is certainly something that's still out there.
Yeah,
Um,
that should be a priority.
you had mentioned automatic ballots. I wasn't quite sure what that was, Keanu.
But that was what you all don't agree with.
The mailing, right? The mailing.
It's the mailing, just the security aspect, seeing if we can really, kind of get the voter rolls accurate, partner with the county to make sure everyone's.
Well, I mean, getting the voter rolls accurate's one issue, but I think what you're saying with automatic is to send out a ballot to everybody.
Yeah, but and the issue with it is because people are concerned about the voter security and things like that. So
I would say that's one of the issues.
What's the other ones?
Well, it's security and some, I think also in an effort of bipartisan, I think we also recognize that Democrats as a whole may tend to do that, but some of our other parties don't. So we've kind of addressed that issue. We're not doing that for now, correct?
Correct.
And that's consistent with the task force that says not to do it unless it's an emergency situation.
Correct.
Do we want to tackle term limits in the next year, or is that something for a future?
I think that's not so difficult, right?
Yes.
I mean, the people spoke, the task force worked very hard. They did a poll as well. And people, I mean, the iron's hot. And I think people are for, term limits. 73% of this poll of city residents want term limits.
Okay, I mean, we can put it there. Again, I'm trying to be the realist as far as what we can accomplish in the next year, leading up to an election. So we can certainly go ahead and look into it and start, the questions come in terms of cumulative versus
consecutive.
So I mean, I think we've talked about the 3-4-year terms, so 12 years. And then I know Keanu was thinking cumulative, and I'm going, I'm leaning towards consecutive, but I mean, we can hash that out.
Okay, so my next question would be, and I'm just throwing it out, is that something that the board needs to take up as a priority, or do we need to recommend that the council bring it up?
Well, it can be in a recommendation in support of the task force, or we can just
exactly.
Yeah, so it can be a priority. It could be a priority of recommending that this be done.
Right. Yeah. So we'll leave it on the list, but there's different ways of approaching it.
Sure.
Okay.
Priority.
So Debbie, cleanup campaign fund reports in regards to definition of expenditure. So we have that going on. So that's ongoing.
That's what Eileen's working on.
So that's kind of a continuing priority. Would you agree?
Yeah, yes. And I was looking at, so I have so many priority lists. So I was looking at the focus priorities leading up to the 2025 election list when I did my list.
Right, and I did too.
Yeah, the one Keanu I think was looking at was, another, like I had the 2023 election priorities. And then of course we have the task force recommendations, because I definitely would put, nonpartisan primaries on my list.
Absolutely. And that's actually what I was going to ask. We can put that on there as a priority, but it goes into ballot question a little bit. So that's why but yeah. I think nonpartisan.
But I mean, the council can decide on that too. It doesn't have to be a ballot question.
So are we talking about nonpartisan elections, or are we talking about open primary? Or are we talking about both?
Both. The question of both.
Because and that's also, again, highly recommended for 30 years, right? It's been the last 3 charter review commissions. And then, of course, the poll was huge. And I think that's the answer to getting more candidates.
All right. Well, we can certainly move forward in terms of discussing it some more. Because one of the things we also have talked about as part of the ballot question is putting that on the ballot, let the people decide.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so maybe what we need to be doing is take a position.
Well, let's do it. I mean, are you comfortable with making a position?
Not right now.
Okay. Debbie and myself, I know we are, but I want to make sure you are.
Again, I'm just trying to, let's see what we can do and what we're planning. It's easy to take a position, but sometimes the implementation, and again, I'm just
Yeah,
trying to be
that's
realist. We got a lot on our plates. And I'm not saying they're not important, but we
Sure.
don't have to necessarily do it all. We can also create a position, you know. When you create a position, you also want to give that resources also to the council. So I've added it to the list.
And maybe we delineate too which ones are responses to the task force recommendations and our updated priorities, and which ones we actually as a board would prioritize leading up to the 2025 election. That could be helpful, Eileen, in the letter to them.
Well, we can also prioritize these two then.
I do. I think we should.
All right, so for Debbie, I have the clean up the campaign fund reports, which is a continuing priority, which is we're working on.
Yeah.
The ballot question process we've, I think, taken care of. Align city code to state election law where applicable. That's kind of ongoing.
Right.
Holdover. Formalize the recount process. I think we've taken care of that.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, I was using
Yeah.
the list that we had been working on
Use
so
my
hard.
list.
Right.
I mean, I would also like voter ID, but that's
Stop it.
totally off the wall.
Doing that.
Well, it's not off the wall. I mean, is it a priority for all of us?
Yeah. I mean, everybody has an ID or can get one, or we can get them one. It's not a availability or a cost. It's free. It's available. And people need one. Everybody should have one. My husband does not want me going out without an ID on me. And I don't like to take anything with me. And he's like, but if something happens. So, you know, people in this day and age need it, should have it anyway.
We'll add
And it
it.
would help with it would help with trust.
Right, so I've added it and we can put it, decide later where it is on the list of priorities. Does that work?
Sure, thanks.
So I put as my priority, see the current proposed legislation enacted into city code, which is ongoing. We still have a long haul just getting that done. Complete the review of fair election practices, make appropriate changes to campaign fund reports, and increase transparency of political contributions. That second one speaks to one of the task force recommendations.
Right.
So would you agree that's an okay one to continue with?
Sure.
Absolutely.
The next one's design a comprehensive communication plan.
100%
And,
agreement.
And so when I'm talking about realistic and things that are on our plate, this type of thing can take up a lot of time. I mean, if, you know, to me, it's a priority. We really did our first communication plan in the last election and got some positive feedback, but it is time consuming. Particularly if we decide that we want to get to the level where we need to be not just putting things on buses or websites, but actually attendance and some things like that. So my thought was to, you know, educate voters and candidates about elections, promote increased turnout for the 2025 municipal elections, and then improve the voter rolls. I try to fit it in there, Debbie, because I know that.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
And I mean, that can be part of the education that can occur in terms of, you know, even if it's something like posters at the rec center saying,
Right.
hey, if you've moved since the last election, have you updated? You know, just let people know. So we can kind of address that task force recommendation there. Assess the feasibility of conducting an open primary. Again, it's a feasibility thing that kind of speaks back to what we added earlier as far as nonpartisan elections and open primary. I'm somewhat neutral about nonpartisan elections. I guess my feeling, though, is at this point, since we've talked about putting it on a ballot question, I would prefer to hear from the voters. You know, we could support it, but I'm not sure that I think we'd have to decide if we want to put forward code for making that change or if we want to just take a position on it and
Yeah.
make.
The only thing about that, and we can discuss more, is that the unaffiliateds already feel unaffiliated. So if this is on a ballot, some of them aren't even voting because they don't think they're included. You know, it would be harder to get them.
Well, they can be on a ballot, they're just identified as unaffiliated, or they're identified as a Green Party.
Right. But
So
it's harder to win and it's harder to get on. And like Sheila Finlayson told me, when, you know, since they can do it, the council can do it, and I was lobbying for it at one point a number of years ago. And she's like, now, Debbie, why would we want to do that? I'm the party in power. Why would I ever want to go, you know, to nonpartisan? I mean, she was it was on TV. She was very upfront about it.
Right. Well, I think that's the reality. And
right. So going to the voters, I mean, we did get a survey. You know, I mean, we did have the task force, an independent bipartisan, well, not even bipartisan. I mean, the last task force charter review commission was all had no Republicans on it, but they still came out with unanimous for nonpartisan elections for the city.
all right. Well, we have it listed as a priority as far as looking at taking a position. So I think we need to separate nonpartisan elections and open primary and keep them separate.
Okay.
And again, my last one is just work with city council to put 2 questions on the ballot, both nonpartisan elections and syncing with state or federal elections. I've been doing some research or reading on down ballot drop off, which at the task force work session, Alderwoman Finlayson asked about, and I found it really interesting. Turnout if you look at turnout in state or presidential elections, it tends to be, let's say, 60%. And there is a study that shows about a 30% what they call down ballot roll off. So they don't go all the way down. If you were to do the numbers, though, that would still be higher than what we get now.
Right.
Technically.
So even if you have the roll off, because the increased turnout, you still get more people. So I think it's worth looking into that and getting some more information to the city council in terms of bringing that up. So if anybody else finds some other information on that, you know, that's certainly something that we can talk about taking a position on. But the big thing really is about turnout and the increased turnout at those elections, which it appears more than makes up for the drop off. I did talk with David Garris about could we get some statistics, but it wasn't really clear where we could get that from, because he can do he could look and see in the presidential election who doesn't end up voting down ballot for, say, Congress, but we really want to find out a municipal. So it really is identifying which city is synced in. So I don't know if Hagerstown might be an option or Frederick. Can't remember if Frederick does it. So I'll look into that a little more.
And so it would be Debbie, you know, looking through your Republican lens, when you talk about more candidates and the majority of those candidates being local Democrats, and there's many candidates running in the same election cycle, they usually join forces. I mean, we usually come together and we say, okay, vote for all the Democrats in this election. And so you often find a lot of slates or a lot of supporting, you know, knocking on doors and stuff like that. And so if we were to do it during the state election cycle, seeing that there are more candidates on the ballot during here, I will share, Debbie, that this may be less helpful to bring more diverse voices to a local election. Now, if we talk about the presidential election, that's a little different because we're just usually presidents and maybe Senate, depending on who that is, and of course Congress maybe. But if we're looking at that, it's not as long as a ballot, which I know the task force kind of went in that direction. A few members or so did mention that that direction was probably more preferred for the federal election year. Now, I support, based off what I think is best for the voters, I do support us being alone in some way, shape, form, so that we are not clustered with all these other candidates running in different election levels at different election levels. So if I were to share my thoughts, of course, as I put in the priorities, either having our current election cycle year, or we do look more so into the federal election year cycle.
Yeah, no, that's a point well taken. Because the reason I'm so supportive of nonpartisan elections at the local level is because our local issues tend to be nonpartisan, versus the federal level, especially, or even state level. So, I would like the candidates to, at the local level, to campaign for everyone, right? And to serve everyone, and voters to vote for whoever best meets their local values. So in that case, it does fit better with staying alone versus tying into a higher level.
Are you comfortable with addressing nonpartisan elections through a ballot question, or do you think you want this group to make a different type of recommendation or propose a code change to city council?
I mean, I think we're ready. I mean, I think we have the data over 30 years of this being a desire of many different personalities looking at it. And just from the state and the nation for cities our size, I don't think we need to go through the process of a ballot referendum on it.
Do you feel that you could get 5 votes on the current city council?
Well, that's the problem.
Well, that's the reality. And
I mean, that's like what Sheila said. But I mean, we could bring public with us. We could bring these charter review commission members. We can bring task force members. We can bring citizens. We can bring ourselves. I mean, we can show up and try to convince Sheila.
It's the city council. So I think this is, a discussion for another day, and also keeping in mind, what our mission is as far as a commission, and kind of look at, and I believe, having been on the Charter Revision Commission, that was part of the strategy, was realizing that it hasn't happened in 30 years. And so the way that it has been being proposed to the city council frequently over the past 30 years hasn't worked. And that's why the whole ballot question came up. And since we have kind of firmed that process up, that maybe, I'm just looking at.
Yeah, no, it's worth
Where do I want to put my money?
Yeah.
The people always. Now, Debbie, maybe we end, coherence with this ballot question, we can share our support for the task force and the Charter Review Commission's recommendations, which is that we go forward in the nonpartisan elections. Though, as you know, I'm a little different where it comes to specifying your affiliation. I do think that that's going to have to be clarified at some point, but overall nonpartisan, if we're looking outside of the two-party system and really just making sure people know you're voting for the person, and that's going to best represent you based off your ideals, ideologies, etc. And so I'm in full support of it, Debbie, just so that you know.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, the 23 years I worked for the city of Bowie, they were most of the time they were all Democrats, and I didn't even know or care. It was a well-run city. The citizens were happy. The staff was happy. No complaints. So it's about the local level.
Okay. All right. Well, we're nearing the 9 o'clock hour. What I will propose I do with this priority list is
Consolidate.
put it together and we can do some ranked choice voting.
Ooh. Okay.
Go from there. So I will put something together and send that out to you all. Does that
Thank
sound
you.
good?
Yes.
Okay, and then we'll have it for our next meeting, which will be the beginning of FY25. So on to task force recommendations. So I appreciate the short time frame that I gave you all, but I was just kind of trying to get a jump on it. We may not really have the time tonight to get into too much discussion. Trying to find my copy of it. I can't.
And mine here.
Yeah.
I think since, well, for our next board meeting, we'll have the campaign fund reports to review. We should be able to get a handle on those ahead of time. I don't expect that there'll be too much change going on. But since we are gonna meet for the July meeting in person in the city council chambers.
City Hall.
And I think that would be helpful. What we've done in the past is just kind of circulate them. So I'm hoping that that can go pretty quickly. And then maybe what we can do is work on this task force recommendations and really just go through and just come up with position statements or follow-up. You know, I think that also we can also communicate to the city council some of the things that we're already doing. Or now that we've identified our priorities, we can say that this is listed for an FY25 priority, that sort of thing. How does that sound?
Yeah.
Fine by me.
We can get into it a little bit more.
In person, yeah.
Okay. Any other items for general discussion?
Progress.
Gina, Ashley, or Cynthia, anything you want to bring up?
I don't have anything.
Nothing from me.
Nothing for me either.
Thank you all.
All right.
Thank-
Well,
Thank you, staff.
moving forward, we're getting there. So, we've gotten a lot done. And we'll plan on probably another 2-hour, close to a 2-hour meeting when we meet on, in July, because we will have a bunch of things to do. I will send a follow-up thank you to Harry and Ryan.
Definitely do that.
And then, if you have any questions, I think it might be worthwhile for them to come from the group as opposed to, individual types of things. So if you have any questions that you want to send to them, we can get something together and do it as a group if you want. If you get something to me in maybe the next week or so.
Yes, please. If you
That
can.
sound good?
Yeah, CCC. Yeah, if you can send that thank you with us on there, and definitely
Right.
want to share our appreciation. Yeah, thanks, Eileen.
So if you have any additional questions, that would be helpful, and then we can make sure that we all get this, same question. We ask them the same question once as opposed to 3 times,
Right.
and all of that. So, all right, anything else? Nope. All right. Well, good meeting, everybody. Can I have a motion to adjourn?
I move that the Board of Supervisors of Elections adjourn at 8:48 on June 20th, 2024.
Got to second that.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Julian.